All right. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillah. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad. Allahumma alimna ma yanfa'una wa anfa'na bima 'allamtana wa zidna ilman wa 'amalan mutaqabbalan bi rahmatika ya arhamar rahimin. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. This session is on the rise of Muslim colleges in America. We have a wonderful panel representing different institutions and different institutional approaches and missions to Islamic higher education in the United States. I'm going to dispense with extended opening remarks and go right into our session. We're going to begin with some framing remarks from Dr. Adnan Aslan, and followed by a round-table discussion amongst the panelists, and hopefully we'll leave sufficient time for questions and answers. So we hope to make this a conversational and an interactive session. Let me begin by thanking Dr. Adnan for his leadership in pulling together this panel, and also Brother Muhammad Aslan, who did a lot of work behind the scenes in order to make it happen. Dr. Adnan Aslan is the Dean of Academics and Professor of Philosophy at Respect Graduate School in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. We also have, just a quick word on all the panelists before we begin, Dr. Munir Sheikh, who is the Vice President of Academic Affairs and Planning at Bayan, Chicago. Dr. Jimmy Jones is Executive Vice President of the Islamic Seminary of America in Texas. That's TISA, T-I-S-A. We're very grateful to Dr. Jones for joining us at the last minute. We were remiss not to have invited him sooner. And also Dr. Timothy Giannati, sadly, he got COVID, so he's not going to be able to be with us today from American Islamic College. We have Dr. Nancy Khalil. She's a core faculty member in the Arab and Muslim American Studies program at the University of Michigan. And I'm Dr. Mahan Mirza, the Executive Director of the Ansari Institute for Global Engagement with Religion. I've also served as the Chief Academic Officer for Zaytuna College from 2013 to 2016. And last year, I was a living bridge between Notre Dame and American Islamic College in Chicago, where I was also Chief Academic Officer. So when I'm able, I'll represent the perspectives of these institutions as moderator, and probably more AIC because I was more recently there and I'm still connected very closely to that team. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Adnan.
Thank you.
Please join me in welcoming him.
Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina wa sanadana wa mawlana Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in wa bihi nasta'in. Thank you very much, Dr. Mahan Mirza. I have 10 minutes. I am going to open the discussion to frame the main problems of the studying Islamic studies in the Western context. So I'm going to draw your attention to the problem, and I offer also a solution to open up to the discussion. So 3 approaches is important in the study of Islamic disciplines. One is the traditional approach, second is the modernist approach, the third is the Orientalist approach. They have all strengths and the weakness. Let me start with the traditional approach. What is the strength of the traditional approach? 2 things is important. One is our religious identity. We know Islam through Quran and the Sunnah, and the truth of Islam is being manifested, reproduced, applied through history, through means of Islamic disciplines. Without Islamic disciplines, what is it? Tafsir, hadith, fiqh, Islamic jurisprudence, Islamic theology, Islam wouldn't be the same as now we have it. So this is very important. So this established a tradition through which we recognize our identity, through which we recognize the Islam as a historical manifestation of the revealed truth. This is the strength. The opportunities of the traditional approach is two things. One, the resources. We have many difficulties and the problems in the modern world. And traditional disciplines provides not only our religious identity, which is very important, and also resources through which we can handle the ills of the modernity. Weakness, this is important. Let me quote from the Fazlur Rahman in his book, Islam and Modernity, and he quotes Muhammad Shibli Numani after visiting the Middle East, 1892, wrote his Safarnameh. I quote, "But those people who have been once as much as touched by the traditional education remain forever irreconcilably estranged from the modern learning." So what is it then? This is the weakness of the traditional scholarship. It limits our perspective. We became alienated to the modern thinking, modern understanding, modern sciences. That is very interestingly, Muhammad Shibli Numani, okay, he is announcing that. Okay, look at our centuries. 20th century, 21st century, how many philosophers we have? Almost none. How many thinkers we have? All the Islamic world. How many? I counted 4. Only 4 thinkers. How many scholars? Thousands and thousands and thousands. Why? What is the main problem? This is it. Because those who are studying traditional sciences, Islamic disciplines, they became alienated to the modern thinking. Okay, threats. What is the threats of the traditional approach? Okay, let me quote from Nietzsche, Friedrich Nietzsche. He wrote, I quote, "To my dear friend George, after you discovered me, it was no great feat to find me. The problem now is how to lose me." Why I am quoting from the Nietzsche? Because he is talking about the 3 important phases: discovery, mastery, and moving from beyond. So what we do generally in traditional scholarship, we discover it, we master it, then this person or this book or this approach occupies our whole existence. We cannot go beyond it. That is why we will see hundreds and thousands of scholars, no philosophers, very few thinkers. Because, this is the very important. Okay, this is the traditional approach. Let me come to the modernist approach.
5 more minutes.
Okay, modernist approach, what is the strength? They believe the Quran, truth of the Quran and the Sunnah. What is the weakness? They see Islam must be interpreted with the modern paradigm. This is the weakness of that. Threat is to, let me quote from Sheber Akhtar. He says that we surely need a principled account of the limits of the sacrifice at the altar of secularism. We need ground rather than motives for the establishing coincidence between the essence of the faith and just exactly those scandals to the intellect which today worldly folk will tolerate. So what I am trying to say, if this approach can initiate a process, modernist approach can initiate a process. This truth of Islam must be interpreted in the line of modern thought. So initiate a process that gradually erodes the core of Islam. You start with the beginning of the debates on the hudud and gender, leading to questioning the truth of the Quran, and so on and so forth. That is the threat of the modernist approach. The opportunities is the pressing issues of the modern world. Gender equality, human rights, implementation of the hudud. These are the very important things. They highlight these problems, engage with this seriously, even if they disagree with the modernist conclusion, even if I am disagree. So, Orientalist approach. What is the strength? Because Orientalists cause some intellectual and scholarly problems. That is the strength of them. Weakness, they do not accept the Quran as the divine truth regarding Islam merely as a cultural and historical phenomenon. So you cannot expect anything good from the Orientalist. Opportunities creates intellectual challenges to the Muslim scholars cannot ignore, thereby stimulating critical reflections and generating new lines of thought. Okay, what is my solution? My solution is this. Each approaches, traditional, modernist, orientalist, has its own strengths and weakness. The ideal path, in my view, is to study Islamic disciplines in order to provide the solutions for the ills and the crisis of modernity. Why we study, let us say, Al-Ghazali? We need to have the agenda to solve the problems, any one of the problems of the modernity. Why you study Al-Maturidi? Why you study classical Islam? For the sake of knowledge? No, we need to go beyond that. And at the Respect Graduate School, established by the Fethullah Gülen Hoca Efendi, we are aiming to achieve this task. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Adnan. I'm going to move the microphone here, and we will pass it around. Okay, so you just heard from Dr. Adnan from Respect Graduate School in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. They just achieved candidacy status towards accreditation this year, so congratulations.
Thank you.
It's a huge milestone.
Yes.
I'm going to ask first Dr. Munir Sheikh and then Dr. Jimmy Jones to either respond to this, traditionalist, modernist, orientalist, or tell us your own approach. How do you approach the study of Islam, and what is distinctive about your own mission for you at Bayan and for you at the Islamic Seminary of America?
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I'll try to keep my remarks brief so that we can have maximum opportunity to broach different ideas. I think this question of how to classify or categorize different approaches to Islamic studies is an important one. I think it's a distinct subject in a way, apart from the question of Muslim institutions in the United States and their curriculum. Of course, there's an important connection there with respect to what is being taught. But I think, the idea of Orientalism, of course, is still a live issue. But if you look at the genealogy of scholarship on Islamic civilization, within the fields that are studying Muslim civilization, Orientalism is not an issue per se. There's current scholarship in which Muslims are participating and non-Muslims are participating, and they're critiquing one another and they're offering different ideas. So I think that's really kind of a separate conversation. In the context of Muslim institutions that are trying to provide resources and tools to Muslims. The question is, what is being taught? In the case of Bayan Islamic Graduate School, we do believe that it's important to ground our students in an understanding of the tradition. From our perspective, the tradition is broad. It includes many different ideas historically that have been produced by scholars from around the Muslim lands. And so we try to provide an exposure to that rich tradition, not a particular slice of the tradition, as some institutions may choose to privilege. In particular, we encompass the various Sunni strands of thought, as well as the ISNA Ashari Shia school. So we consider these to be mainstream Islamic perspectives, both in terms of living practice today, but also in terms of the historical tradition, because they were interpenetrating discourses that involve scholars of these various traditions. So that's kind of the grounding upon which our institution tries to advance an understanding of a nuanced tradition amongst our students. And within that, of course, there's an integration of contemporary scholarship that has been produced by a variety of scholars within the academy. And our professors obviously have to determine how best to utilize that scholarship, whether in terms of critiquing it and showing a genealogy of critique, or building upon it and validating certain more recent lines of thought that have debunked many Orientalist ideas and have advanced new ideas about how to understand the lived Islamic experience. I'll just end with saying that the purpose of the institution is to increase the capacity of leadership and scholarship within the American Muslim community.
Thank you. Dr. Jimmy Jones, the Islamic Seminary of America.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Well, quite frankly, Dr. Adnan, this is something I've never really thought about, to be honest with you. I think it's because my area is not Islamic studies or philosophy. My area is actually comparative religions, social cultural theory, and so I've never thought about that. That's number one. And I happen to be the acting chief executive officer at TISA. Number two, the architects of our curriculum, the people, the primary architects, because we sort of crowdsourced our curriculum. I could talk about that a little while later, were Dr. Yasser Qadi, Dr. Tamara Gray, Dr. Ihsan Bagby. These are the primary people, and they all three have different disciplines. They were trained differently. And I think this begins to speak to what TISA is really about. It's not one particular way of looking at Islam. I mean, I sat with them, their areas, they were all trained in Islamic studies in various institutions, but a lot of times they were talking in Arabic. I couldn't speak Arabic, so I sort of sat by and took notes. That's the second point. The third point is that when we started thinking about this matter of curriculum, the primary question is, what do we need to make our students thought and institutional leaders in this place and this time? And that's sort of the question that we were looking for, because we have these 3 R's that we should reconnect to our soul. We should regain the moral and intellectual high ground. At one time, Islam had the moral and intellectual high ground, right? And we should recalibrate Islam, as others have done, for this place and time. That these are not reform. This is not reform Islam. This is looking into our rich, varied, and deep history and pulling from it. So that's my response.
Okay, I'm going to ask you a question. Thank you. All right, the conversation is just beginning. I want to pull in Dr. Nancy Khalil. You are at the University of Michigan. Please tell us a little bit about your own work, and especially how it intersects with this whole space of Islamic higher learning.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to this panel. I'm actually excited to be here to learn from you as much as I am to share what I know. My research has been in the space of Islamic higher education for over a decade now. It started with an interest in who's training imams and how are they training them and who gets to decide who's an imam. But that extends also to our institutions of Muslim higher education, who gets to decide what's an institution of Muslim higher education. And as our institutions emerge, of which when I started this research there was probably a handful, now there's arguably 24 different institutions at different levels of maturity that are offering what we could call a degree equivalent type of program. Who gets to decide which of those is a bona fide institution? And there are many forces that impact how a higher education institution takes shape. We mentioned some of them here today, like the philosophy and the mission of the institution is one of the impetuses that determines what it's doing, why it's doing it, how it's doing it. But there are other forces that can impact as well, including funding, where's the money coming from and how do you attain it? Education policies, who can establish an institution in the geographic location that they're in, what's required from the government apparatuses in that location, bureaucracies that you have to go through to institutionalize even where you're allowed to put your institution, the demand for it, who wants these institutions, who's going to attend them, the ecosystem of religious education there, like what are other faith-based groups doing and what do their institutions look like. And then what I focus most on is recognition, who recognizes these institutions, specifically through the lens of accreditation. And accreditation in the United States as a force started by trying to preserve that whole ecosystem of higher education to make sure that government funding wasn't being used for or what they'll call like diploma mills or for-profit institutions or institutions that weren't well-intentioned. So when the US government is giving educational subsidies, how do we make sure that that's going to actually bona fide institutions of higher education? And that's when the government started to recognize education accreditation boards to determine, okay, these are bona fide institutions. So within the Muslim space, how do we come into conversation with that? What does the ecosystem of accreditation, does it impact our own institutions, what we teach, how we teach, and who we teach it to? And that's what I've been working on and with many of the seminaries and continue to work on.
Thank you. Yeah, so higher education, like most things, are highly regulated in this country. And so jumping through hoops, demonstrating that your education is credible, that the students are actually going to get what you advertise. There are all kinds of evidence. There's evidence that institutions have to provide in order to demonstrate that they're actually viable. And Muslim institutions are just entering this field, and so there are accrediting bodies that are more universal, but there are also accrediting bodies that accredit specific institutions like theological schools. And so how can we carve out a space where we regulate, and accredit each other, and we recognize that, we're established, we're accredited, but this other institution, which is maybe having a hard time, we can vouch for them and then establish our own community of institutions. This is all just coming up, and it's exciting to see, and so thank you for the work that you're doing. What I'm going to do now is just open it up. Any one of you can answer this question. Here's my first sort of open lob. What makes a class at your institution, whether it's TISA or Bayan or Respect, different from, say, a class at the University of Chicago or Harvard or any one of these institutions? And then I'd like you to chime in, and based on what you hear, Dr. Nancy, how is that different from, say, a place like Michigan? So who wants to go?
Not me.
All right.
Assalamu alaikum again. I think what was mentioned in the opening remarks regarding sort of the traditional framework, that is, a kind of modality of instruction where students go and they become ulama. Bayan is not a place like that. However, we have many students who are ulama, who have studied at Al-Azhar or who have come from Darul Ulooms, or students who are not from those backgrounds and have come from different undergraduate institutions with different kinds of degrees. So they all mix together and they all learn from each other just as much as they learn from their professors. And this has been a very powerful experience because we can see that different people's paths in life bring different experiences to the table, different kinds of knowledge that comes into play with one another. So we believe that it's a very practical way of enriching, again, that capacity building ability that takes place within our classroom. But it is grounded, again, in sort of an understanding of belief, right? It's a confessional space. That's one of the words that is often used to distinguish Muslim institutions that are educational in nature from a secular university. Secular institutions are not necessarily confessional spaces. People don't proclaim their faith. They kind of set it aside. They may have a conviction, but it doesn't necessarily factor into the discourse or into the analysis of the topic that's being discussed. Whereas in the Muslim institutions, in Bayan and others, being Muslim and one's perspective as a Muslim, one's worldview, one's spirituality informs the kind of conversations that take place in the classroom.
Bismillah. Well, the first thing is that we don't pretend that we're unbiased. Many of the other institutions I've attended, and I've been in higher education for half a century and worked at, pretend at some level that they're unbiased. We don't pretend that. We pretend that we're part of a project to, as my friend Dr. Sherman Jackson said yesterday, to indigenize Islam in this place. And this is not assimilation on the one hand, but this is an attempt to be authentically American and authentically Muslim at the same time. And this is not an easy thing to do because one side or other will always criticize you for what you've done. I think the best thing to say is, so first, we don't pretend that we're unbiased. We're part of a project. One of the reasons why this came about was because those of us who started ISNA many years ago wanted to make sure that we were training our own leaders for our own institutions. And so we have 3 R's we often talk about at our institutions. One is that we're religiously rooted. We have certain red lines. We're not going to pretend that we're going to tackle everything. There's certain things we won't tackle because our faith commitment, what's confessional, that's solid for us. Second, we are contextually relevant. We'll tackle any issue, and I do mean any issue, that we might face in the United States and Canada. We have students from Canada as well. And our students do, mashallah, they do an excellent job. Of course, we don't tackle all of them, but that's what I mean about crowdsource. We tackle the ones that matter to our students. And we have a broad, I think we have students from various areas. And then we're academically rigorous. There's a lot of reading, writing, thinking, challenging that goes on in our classrooms. That again, we have people who've taught at other institutions that are top tier institutions who would argue that our students are the best prepared. And they don't mean by preparation in terms of where they came from, even though 40% of our students already have a master's degree when they walk in the door. We have PhDs, we have doctors, but more IT people than anybody else. But what I mean by best prepared, number one, they're motivated to learn. Number two, they come to class having read the material. When I walk in my class in other institutions, I expect that only 20% of the students have read. In this case, it's flipped here. It's about 80% of students have actually read and thought about it and have questions about the materials. And number three, they're not afraid to challenge me, which is something most of our, and this is, again, very different from what I've seen in other institutions where I've worked.
Thank you. Do you want to go or?
Yeah, I'll speak after you.
Okay.
Tell us about Michigan.
Well,
How do they study Islam?
Michigan is an interesting place because it doesn't actually have a religion department, which is not common at many of our large universities around the country. So I want to rewind a little. Higher education and religion have been intertwined since inception. I mean, in the US, and I would argue within our Islamic tradition, like, it was always about teaching religion. That was originally the intent. And then it shifted away from that. And then it became about this kind of scientific capitalist agenda. What are the skills? What are we doing with it? How do we make sure that there's a market for them? And there was pushback against that, right? We need to retain some of the philosophical and the humanities and the large thinking, and especially with religious institutions, like, there's a bigger goal and a spiritual goal and other purposes besides the market. But we're seeing that push resurface, especially with the current administration. It's very much about this marketization of things. And when I talk about the forces on our institutions, that's definitely a part of it. What's being taught and how it's being taught comes out of that. So when Dr. Adnan earlier talked about this Orientalist approach, when you look at Islamic studies at most of our non-Muslim institutions, they came about at these institutions as a part of a colonial enterprise wanting to understand Islam and learn Arabic, because they're going to those parts of the world and they want whether it's their government officials or their future military officials, or whoever it is, to understand the ways of those people. That's where it came from. Unlike other fields that you might see in our universities that emerged out of resistance to oppression. So if you look at, for example, Black studies at most universities in the United States, those emerged from people that were resisting a history of oppression that Black people faced in this country, to empower them to learn their histories and to create education for that community. So they both exist. They could both be two different departments or centers at the university, but why they came about and who the scholars are in them are for very different reasons. And the students will feel that. They'll feel, especially if you're like a Muslim student taking traditional kind of Islamic studies at a Harvard or at a University of Michigan, even before Dr. Sherman Jackson. We lost Dr. Sherman Jackson, but if you don't have a Muslim professor, which some do, even if he's teaching it, he's going to be forced to teach some literature that's considered not like seminal in that field of Orientalists, who you have to read as a part of the rite of passage to get a degree in that space. So it is very much a different place, and I think how it is at the non-Muslim institution, I'll say, will depend on who the faculty are that they've hired and the approach that they take to teaching that, and how much they want to offer a resistance to the historically Oriental approach, or are just kind of continuing along it depending on their own education. Yeah.
Thank you. Would you like to chime in?
Yes.
Sure.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. So at Respect Graduate School, so the first important things is that we are, educating our students by the Muslim scholars. This is important. And we are aware of the context and the problems of the modern education and Islamic education within the modern context. So first important things, we want to move our students from devotional language to the academic language. This is not easy. This is not really easy, because they are coming here to have in a sense, they have this, let me say, custom and ability to think this within the context of the devotional language. And the academic language is the universal language. We can let me say, present the truth of Islam for everybody using this academic language. This is important. The second important thing, we have a lot of emphasis on the critical thinking. Critical thinking skills is one of our purpose in the Respect Graduate School, because through that students able to criticize himself as well as the materials they are studying, or the great scholars. Through that they may build up their own ideas and their own opinions about the various issues. These are the important things we are trying to do that. Okay, the other things, of course, is to the problems of the modernity. We always approaches, okay, how can you approach to the problems, or the, of course, goods and the, ills and the goods and the modernity, and how can you approach it, how can you relate with the Islamic thought. This is also important.
Thank you. Thank you. I have a number of follow-up questions. I'm going to maybe try to combine them a little bit. But you're saying, trying to move from academic to devotional reminds me of something Sheikh Hamza used to say at Zaytuna. He coined the term "acca-devotional" because he didn't like the binary between the two. So he was trying to create an interesting third space. Would love to hear your thoughts on that. Also, for those of you who walked in a little late, let me just say, Dr. Timothy Giannati from AIC, American Islamic College, couldn't make it, but we're very happy to have Dr. Jimmy Jones with us from TISA, the Islamic Seminary of America. Also, Dr. Jihad Turk from Bayan couldn't make it, but Dr. Munir Sheikh is here from Bayan, and obviously Dr. Nancy Khalil and from the University of Michigan, and Dr. Adnan Aslan from Respect Graduate School in Pennsylvania, in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. So let me just frame this question with something that American Islamic College, which is right here in Chicago, it likes to say that we are unabashedly Muslim, non-denominational, but welcoming to peoples of all faiths. So this is one way in which American Islamic College in Chicago describes itself. And the question arises when Dr. Munir, you spoke about, that Bayan is creating a confessional space. There are confessional spaces like Hartford Seminary, which is now Hartford International University for Religion and Peace. And so how do we deal with the question of pluralism within Islam is one question across the different schools. Some of you already touched upon that. But outside of Islam, so are your institutions, obviously in the early stages, they're going to be self-selecting, but ultimately, do you envision a school that's that's going to remain Muslim, or that will be welcoming to peoples of other faiths? Anybody who would like to take this on?
Yeah, I can begin. So one of the things that may not be evident, Bayan is an independent 501c3 organization, but we operate at the Chicago Theological Seminary here. And that's a historically Christian seminary, which has people of various denominations who've studied there over the years. Jesse Jackson, for example, is one of their graduates. And we've always had this kind of arrangement, Bayan in particular. We used to be affiliated with the Claremont School of Theology in California. Since 2019, we've been here in Chicago. We have a hybrid model of instruction, so our students and our faculty come into Chicago for 1 week every academic term, and they study intensively during that week, and then they go back home, and the rest is online. So that facilitates access to this graduate education for people who might be living around the country. So that's one issue. But because we're part of this Christian seminary historically, although they now consider themselves more to be a interfaith seminary, and they value the fact that a significant proportion of the students that are enrolled at the Chicago Theological Seminary through Bayan are Muslim. They value that contribution to the collective conversation about the role of faith leaders in America going forward. How are we going to challenge some of the, let's say, harmful interpretations of religion that are taking place and impacting society and politics in certain kinds of ways? Obviously, people will fall on different sides of different issues, but nevertheless, there has to be a space for grappling with those matters and expressing how different faith traditions might provide solutions. So our students, 25% of their coursework is with professors from the Chicago Theological Seminary. So they get that exposure. They represent their understanding of Islamic teachings and beliefs, and they engage in that dialogue. Similarly, students from the seminary, the Chicago Theological Seminary, enroll in Bayan courses. And we've always had students of various backgrounds and viewpoints, studying and taking courses with our Muslim professors. Predominantly, we have some professors who are not Muslim, but who appreciate the mission of Bayan and also contribute to the education of our students. So that's kind of a fundamental approach that we have chosen to take, and that has been the way in which we've also had an accreditation for our programs, is through this partnership. Like many other Muslim institutions, independent accreditation, some have already acquired that, achieved that, and Bayan is on track to do that as well, and inshallah others will as well. That does come back to the question of ultimately, even if accreditation is available through regional or national bodies that are secular in nature or governmental in nature, we ourselves as institutions stemming from the American Muslim community have the capacity, given financial support, to accredit ourselves and to keep ourselves operating at the highest levels of professionalism and academic rigor. So that's the vision for going forward collectively as various institutions within this space. But I hope I've given you a little bit more insight into how we've been able to equip our students with an opportunity to engage broader issues and individuals, peers, you can say, from other faith traditions, so that we can cooperate where it's possible and find common ground.
Thank you. That was a great comprehensive answer. What I'm going to do, because I'm looking at time, there's 19 minutes. I'm going to ask my last two questions together, and then I'm going to invite the others to respond to either this question or any of these final two, and then we want to open it up to at least give some time to the audience. So this question is about the practical aspect of building, pragmatic aspect, the worldly aspect or challenges of building institutions of higher learning. It's expensive. I mean, it's really expensive. And what we see with the rise of all of these Islamic institutions of higher learning is we're coming to the same kind of group of Muslims, mainly in the United States, and trying to get a piece of the pie. And in order to do this, we have to highlight our distinctiveness, not just distinctiveness from secular universities or higher or academia, broadly defined, but also from each other. And so how do we find ways to constructively cooperate while maintaining our distinctive appeal in a way? That's the big question. And then just directing this maybe to all of you, but also to Dr. Nancy, Michigan has a huge Muslim population. University of Michigan, like many of the public universities in Chicago, they have thousands of Muslim students, and so they make their own spaces. And so when we think of prioritizing, this to all of you, first of all, should we, instead of having all these different colleges, should we prioritize one, build it really well, and then branch out? Or how do we cooperate and prioritize them all in a cooperative way? And for the public universities, they have their own demands from the community to endow chairs and build centers, and that's also competing with the colleges coming and fundraising to form their own little niche away from the public university, and in some ways defining itself against that university. And so would you say that's harmful, or what is a constructive way to manage this? So that's the big two questions. I've tried to combine them. Anybody, each of you can comment briefly, and then we'll open it up to the floor. You're ready to go. Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much. The first question you asked before about the pluralism, which is very important. And so, Respect Graduate School is non-denominational. In a sense, we accept all the different sects of the Islam. Also, we have the Christian students. One of them is graduated. She was very happy. She was nun. She was professor, and she attended our courses, and she graduated, and she did a thesis on Catherine of Genoa, comparing with the Rabia al-Atawiyya. It was a beautiful thesis. So that shows that we are open them, other faith as well. So the religious pluralism or interreligious relations is very important because it comes from our founding father, in a sense. Fethullah Gülen was the man who started this dialogue in Turkey in 1990. It was very difficult time that time, and he started the dialogue with the many groups, different groups, with different religious sects, especially let me say liberal people and nationalists and so on and so forth. So that we are coming from that philosophy. So we are trying to open our institution to interreligious and intrafaith as well together. I mean, this is one. So we have the principles and also implementation. Hizmet movement now implementing these principles. I mean, intrafaith, interreligious dialogues, and they are doing this interpretation. That is very important. And so what is the more important, that brings us together is the core Islamic faith tenets and the values. Okay, all of us, we come together, unite in that. But when we come to interpretation, of course, we have the different cultural background, different understanding. So there's no harm to interpret these core Islamic values and Islamic principles. So this is what distinguishes us from the other institutions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. You can pass it after you.
So there's a couple things I want to just capture that were mentioned here. The first is this idea of accreditation. It's actually extremely complicated and it's very layered, and I've done a wealth of research in this space, but it does impact our institutions in different ways. So for example, if Bayan didn't want to give degrees, they probably wouldn't need to have these partnerships with other institutions that are accredited to be able to confer these degrees. If there was some other metric or system this community could recognize, and other communities that graduates or students of these institutions go to and could be recognized, you wouldn't need. So accreditation is really about recognition, and who gets the power to do that, I think, is a really important question. So it was said here, like, do Muslims need their own accreditation board? That's a question. I just convened 23 different seminaries at the University of Michigan to talk about this specifically, and what does it mean to do that? So that's something I wanted to put out there. The second thing is that when we're establishing Muslim institutions of higher learning, there's likely two lenses through which we can look at this. Is it about preserving religion or preserving religious identity, or both? And which one is the primary matters. So if we look at the history of the Catholics here in America, they were a marginalized community, right? Like, Catholics were not welcome when they first arrived. And they wanted to push back against that. Their being majority white helped them a lot. But in the process of that, they thought about, how do we integrate ourselves into the society? And education, of course, was one of the primary ways. And they reached an internal conflict. Do we establish our own Catholic universities, or do we invest in what they call the Newman Centers, which are their houses at any university that house their Catholic chaplain and arrange and support students in their being Catholic on campus? So think of the MSA, but more formalized and structured and with staff. And so they said, where do we invest, right? We have to pick where our money goes. But they weren't really focused on preserving religion, because their religion has a pope that's going to preserve what Catholicism is, and it's very hierarchical, down with other bishops, down to the priests in the churches. That wasn't their primary concern. It was all about identity and integration. Whereas with Muslims, it's different. because we have both forces at play, and each institution, I think, skews differently towards what it's focused on, and that's part of how it's making the decisions that it's making. So those are the two things I want to capture.
Thank you. Great points. Yeah.
Bismillah. I'm very aware that we're running out of time, so I'll try to be very brief. When it comes to pluralism, we're unapologetically Muslim because we're part of a project to indigenize Islam right here, right now. And so we're not that concerned about whether or not Christians can attend. They can attend, but we're not that concerned about it. But at the same token, as a person who interviews everybody who comes in, we have all kinds of Islam at Islamic Center of America. When it comes to money, according to Lily, Muslims donated over $1.8 billion with the B last year. We're very giving people, and I think there's enough money to, now I don't want to get long, but look up something called HELM, HELM, and it's something that's run by the Disciples of Christ. They call it the Christian Church. They have 350,000 members in 2018. They have a lot more now. But at that point, I want you to think about this. They had 15 undergraduate schools run by them, and they had 7 seminaries, right? And they had 27,000 students of that 350,000 students. I want you to think about it for a moment. We have a lot more people and a lot more money, and I think we ought to be about the business of doing something like HELM.
Very good. Okay, yeah, excellent point. It's not either or. It's respect and Bayan and Michigan and TISA and AIC and Zaytuna and many more. Yes. So let me open it up to the floor. Yes, Dr. Tipu, we'll take a few questions and then. Yeah.
I think you brought up the issue of thinkers, somebody brought it up, but thinkers in Islam that has some impact on thought. And what came to my mind was Muhammad's father. And he has a wider view. But then I thought about when we were talking that if you have area studies, or take period studies as the Muslim developed over time, so that integrated and distributed among the centers. I just want to say one thing during the moment.
Very quickly, with a question mark at the end.
Yes, you should.
All right.
I spent my life bound with nature and science, and I got stuck with it, and I forgot myself. But I can say that if you go I first hate those statues, then I worship them, and then I destroy them. That's science. That's history.
This is a very deep point, and I think we can sit with it. But I will take the thank you. It's not a question, it was a comment.
The question was about area studies,
Okay.
Senegal, Malaysia, South Asia.
So do any of the curricula represented by the schools here?
And the period studies.
Yeah, do.
Yeah. I mean, we have a Islamic history survey course, which incorporates the various regions and the different contributions and the different developments, religiously, politically, spiritually, economically, material culture, architecture, et cetera. Obviously, the curriculum is limited. It's one graduate course, but we have electives as well in Islam in West Africa, for example, and other, focus areas, whether it's literature or other things.
It's good. All right. At American Islamic College, just very quickly, we do these survey history courses, but the focus more in terms of areas on Muslim American studies. But there are lots of other, obviously, themes mostly pertaining to Islamic thought. Yes, I saw your hand, brother, and then we'll come to you, sister.
So Sister Nancy made a great point about Muslim identity, So I want to bring that down to regional level. So all these people, we all come from different neighborhoods, different states. So we have mosques and Islamic institutions. So I wrote down my question, so to the point. I won't take up your time, but please allow me to read. So our history shows us that in the example of Imam Abu Hanifa, who refused to compromise his independence even under pressure from rulers, and who encouraged critical reasoning in developing Islamic law. So today, many of our imams and scholars depend on mosques, universities, and new Islamic colleges like yourselves. So from there, for their livelihoods, that's how they make their money, and that's their attachment. So the question is, how can imams and scholars in the West maintain that spirit of independence and become strong critical thinkers, while still working within institutions that provide their income? So what can our roles be as community members to those mosques? Thank you.
Yeah, it's a great question. I know that TISA is in the business of, I was at the breakfast this morning, creating movers and shakers and leaders for the community. Would you have any insights on this, Sam?
As I said, I've been in higher education for a half century. The question just doesn't ring to me. College professors have a good deal of leeway in what they think and what they do. And so I'm challenged the premise of the question, and that, and that's because of tenure, of course. And the point is that we need a place where we can train people to be critical, reflective thinkers. And I think it's about the culture of that particular institution. And you should just look around and see which ones are producing that, or who's teaching there, and you'll have an idea of who's likely to be the kind of independent thinkers when they get to your mosque.
Nancy, go.
So one of the things I mentioned earlier is my initial research was on the profession of imams in the United States. So people always, consider it like we have a crisis of imams. I don't really like that word. I feel like everything has, opportunities and challenges. So what I want to say is that when I'm asked regularly, like, how do we solve the challenge or the crisis or the problem of the profession of the imam, what it often comes back to for me is a strong and healthy ecosystem of Islamic higher learning. If you have a strong and healthy ecosystem of higher learning, you have a lot of things that will naturally take care of themselves. One is that there's multiple places for people to work and circulate and study and ideas to flow. Two is that some of our professions will start to really formulate their identities as curricula emerge to train them, and their teachers are understanding the market that I talked about earlier of where their graduates are going, and helping to determine, okay, we have a path here for those that want to actually teach religion versus those that want to do something more administrative but in a religious space, etc. And then the other piece that's important to the point that Dr. Jones importantly brought up on tenure, when you have this ecosystem of strong institutions, you'll also have scholars, ideally, whose jobs are protected, which preserves these ideas and allows for critical thinking in the classroom. And as you mentioned, unlike what I think is the case in many international institutions of Islamic higher learning today, historically, there was a give and take with scholars and students. They went back and forth and they debated, and ideas were, robust. But now, many of our institutions, it's very much like you have to spend a decade or more memorizing everything that came before you very well before you're given the authority to enter into any debates or conversation. Here we have a little bit of a different situation in the US, and I think that's one of our advantages as these institutions coalesce and form.
Yeah.
Just on a practical level, to address your question, we have a course, and I'm sure some of the other institutions have similar courses. It's called Muslim Adolescent Identity Formation. Why would we have such a course? Because obviously there's a critical need to address how we're providing support and religious knowledge to our younger folks who are coming up in the climate in which we live. We have chaplaincy programs. Several of the institutions do that because it's important to focus on people's spiritual and mental health counseling Muslims, counseling Muslim youth, et cetera, et cetera. So the curriculum, as Nancy was saying, is meant to sort of respond to the actual things that we're contending with as a community, not just the important disciplines that are in the tradition, theology, law, et cetera, but also in terms of how can we integrate knowledge from an Islamic perspective to address the challenges that we face.
We are out of time. It goes so quickly. But I know there were 2 questions, so if you allow me, we'll hear the questions, but we won't hear the answers. It's always good to have more questions than answers. I believe that was also underneath your point, Dr. Tipu, maybe a little bit with the science. And this is, at least we know this is a very important conversation to continue to have. So sister, would come to the mic, both you and brother, and briefly ask your questions, and that'll end this session. Come on up, so everyone can hear. Just hold it a little bit away from your mouth.
Assalamu alaikum. My question is just very brief. It's just like, what are the criteria specifically that you look for accreditation that are especially hard with the current administration? Like, is it do they focus on finance? Do they focus on what your backgrounds are? Like, who are you hiring? Like, where do you come from? Like, what do they focus on? What do you have to like really strive to reconcile with?
Excellent question. Too bad we will not hear the answer from the state, brother.
I was gonna ask. The whole point of higher learning is to build, mature, and defend the mental institution of Islamic studies and knowledge. Perhaps the greatest big bad monster in front of this is Orientalism, because it's more than just dogma, right? It's dogma against Islam. It's rather the imposition of a foreign paradigm of thought with foreign principles and foreign understandings onto the Islamic system, and then thus misconstruing fundamental pieces of it that can sometimes slip between the cracks. And to fix this is more than just sitting in a room and pontificating and writing 50 articles nobody reads. It's a structural and paradigmatic thing. Then everything in the institution is impacted. It's from the way that the teachers are treated to the way that the students sit around, to everything in the institution. I'm just going to ask how this is going to be met.
A question worthy of a seminar. Please join me in thanking the panel. And thank you all for coming.
Thank you.